Well, hello everybody and welcome to another episode, and this week I'm going to show you my top picks for 28mm and 35mm vintage wide-angle lenses. These lenses very often offer really good value for money. They often sell quite cheaply. There are a lot of them about because at one time back in the day, any photographer who considered themselves a photographer would have, at the very minimum, a 28mm, a 50mm and a 135mm lens in their kit, and that was considered the absolute minimum for a serious photographer. So there are a great many of these lenses about. They're often very sharp. They have inherently sharp characteristics, and they also encourage compositional skills because they're so wide. You're going to have a lot in your shot, so they're going to develop your compositional skills about arranging those visual elements within the shot. So the first lens we're going to look at today is this lovely Pentax lens, the Pentax 28mm. In fact, it's the SMC Pentax M 28mm f 2.8. It's a very unpretentious little lens, and it doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is. It doesn't look much, but looks can be deceptive. This is a very nice optic. And there's our little Pentax lens, and you can see those famous Pentax coatings there that do so much for image quality. Notice how small this lens is. It's really tiny. 28mm are inherently small, but this one is particularly small and compact. It's not quite a pancake, but it's really not far off. I think there may be some plastic used somewhere in this lens. Possibly the aperture ring is plastic, but most of it is metal, and it's very solidly made, and it feels very nice even now. This lens is probably 40 or 50 years old, but that focus ring still turns very, very smoothly. This is a Pentax lens with Pentax glass and coatings, and it makes some very fine images too. Pentax colours are stunning. They're well known for it, and they have a colour signature that's unlike any other lens I've seen. They're sort of subtle and soft, but they have some substance also. I'd like to use the word pastel-y, but that's not quite appropriate. Nevertheless, they do have a delicate quality to them. They also have resonance and vibrance as well. These do make some very nice colours indeed. The Pentax look is pretty unique when it comes to colour. I've not really seen anything else like it. It's delicate and subtle, but it's somehow also strong and powerful, very unusual, and a very beautiful look as well, in my opinion. Conventional wisdom holds that street photography is best done with a wide-angle lens, but I'm not too sure I agree with that. Sure, these wides are very good for zone focusing, and they adapt themselves to that very easily because of their inherently greater depth of field. But to do street with one of these, you need to be very close to your subject. Otherwise, they're just going to be a small dot in the frame somewhere. So that can be very daunting as a photographer, and also people might not like it, and so we don't want to upset anybody. I think street is best done with a longer lens, but if you're one of those photographers who uses this for street or who uses wides for street, then maximum respect, because it does take a certain amount of courage. Street portraits aside though, for general street shots, general wide street shots, this lens is an excellent tool, and it really will develop your compositional skills because you're going to have to think creatively about how you arrange the elements in your shot to give the maximum visual impact. As regards cost, you'll probably find a good one of these for between 50 to 70 pounds, possibly a little bit more, but I wouldn't pay too much more than that. At that price, this lens is an absolute bargain. Next we have another lens from Konica. It's the Konica Hexanon 28mm f3.5. Now, unfortunately, I don't actually physically have this lens with me anymore, but I have all the shots I've taken from it, and it's a lovely little piece of kit. In fact, it's a beautiful little lens. It's a little bit plasticky. It's not quite as solid, quite as strong, quite as robust feeling as the Pentax. It doesn't have the quality of feel that that lens has, but it does have Konica Hexanon coatings and glass, and they were superb, so this lens really does make some outstanding images. Hexanons were Konica's top line of lenses. There was another line of lenses called Hexar, which didn't quite have the same quality of glass or coatings, so this is their top line, their best offering. The colours from this lens are outstanding. Konica are well known for their excellent and outstanding colours. This one is no exception. It makes colours that are absolutely beautiful. To my eye, they're nicer than the images from the Pentax. They're fuller, they're stronger, they're richer, more saturated, punchier, just that little bit more body and kick, and it has a little more contrast too. It renders colours in a slightly unusual way. They're bold and punchy, but they're slightly on the cool side as well. It's one of the nicest lenses for colour, at least to my eye. It's very sharp, wide open, which you'd expect from a 28, and this one certainly doesn't disappoint. Now at f3.5, this is a relatively slow lens, so you're not going to get a great deal of background blur out of it. There is some blur if you go to its minimum focus distance of 30 centimeters, and what there is very nice. But of course, these lenses are not really about background blur. These lenses are about big, wide panoramic shots, maybe for landscapes, for street shooting, for anything that needs a wide angle lens capable of squishing in as much of the field of view as possible. This is a very beautiful little lens. It's light and compact. It's a take anywhere, go anywhere lens. It'll give you a nice big wide field of view, and it's actually not that expensive at the moment either. These slower 28mm do tend to go for very good prices. I bought this one for £30. It was in its original box. It still had its pass sticker on it. It had had hardly any use, and for £30 I got a really nice little 28. Now when I came to sell it, I actually sold it for £25, and so somebody got a real bargain there. These lenses are not expensive and offer a really good way into wide angle shooting, and of course at this price they are an absolute bargain. Next we've got something really quite special. Occasionally you find a lens that just blows you away, and this is one such. It's really quite stunning. It was lent to me by viewer Ralph Matz, so many thanks for the loan, Ralph, and it's the Minolta 35mm f1.8. I don't actually have it with me at the moment. I've sent it back to Ralph. However, I do have the images I've shot with it, and they really are quite something. It's very unusual for vintage 35s to have an aperture this wide, so we've really got some interesting results here. It's great in low light, and it gives you some blur rather more than other 35s of f3.5 and f2.8 would give. This is really quite a special lens. For me, it's the blur that this lens makes that is one of the major things that helps to make it a special lens. It's quite simply beautiful. Technically it's well behaved and it's very smooth for the most part, but it goes beyond that. Technical specification rarely tells the whole story. Blur from this lens is fun, energetic and just plain joyous. Minimum focus distance is 30 centimeters, so it won't go as close as the Carl Zeiss Jena Flektogon, which focuses all the way down to 20 centimeters. So it doesn't make the massive blur that lens makes, but I think the Minolta's blur is certainly on a par with the blur from the Zeiss Jena, which is itself very, very nice. It's pretty sharp, wide open. The corners are a little bit soft, but I didn't find that too troublesome. If you do, then stop it down and it's gone by f8 and you get sharpness right across the frame. I shot this lens wide open though because I found it far more than acceptably sharp and I love the blur it makes. Colours are simply stunning. They're light and bright and joyous. Minolta lenses are well known for their outstanding colour rendering, and this one does not let the side down. Colours are full, bright, saturated. Only rarely have I seen colours this nice. They really are beautiful. So this is a fine little lens and it makes some very, very nice images too. A good one will cost you between £100 to £150, so not the cheapest vintage wide out there, but it's a very good price for a wide 35mm. I'd say this lens is really good value for money and the images it makes are just stunning. Next we've got the Olympus OM Zuiko 28mm f2.8. Regular viewers of the channel will know that Olympus lenses are favourites of mine. I used the f3.5 version of this lens for a number of years and it was on my previous best wides list because that's a very nice lens with great contrast, colour and sharpness. This one has all those qualities, plus it has an extra stop of light, so it's not quite so limited as the 3.5. Like all the Zuikos, this is a beautifully made lens with a real feeling of quality when you handle it. It's very small, as we might expect. I think it might be slightly shorter than the Pentax. These lenses are lovely to just hold in your hand. That's how nicely made they are. It's got all the Olympus house style that we would usually expect from Olympus lenses. It's got the silver ring at the rear here. The depth of field scale is on that ring. Then we've got the focus ring and the aperture scale up front. So this is a lovely lens and I'm glad to say that the images it makes are equally nice. Wide open, it's very sharp. There's a little softness in the corners, but that's to be expected, I guess. It's not quite as soft in the corners as the Minolta 1.8, but that too is to be expected. This, with its smaller aperture, is likely to be sharper across the frame. It sharpens up when you stop it down, of course, and that makes zone focusing easily possible with the very clear depth of field scale on the rear of the lens there. Colour is up to the usual very high Zuiko standards. It's saturated and strong. Colours are resonant and deep. I love the way this lens renders colours. It gives a really pleasing look and it has a touch of chrome about it, chrome film from the old days. It's very contrasty as well. Images have a lot of punch. Blacks are strong, whites are bright, unless you catch the sun at the wrong angle, that is, but no lens is immune from that, at least to some degree or another. I really like this little lens. It's light and compact, it has very nice optical quality and it's beautifully made as well. A good one should cost you from between 50 to 70 pounds or thereabouts, less if you're lucky, but prices for the OM Zuikos have been going up recently, so don't hang about. Finally, we've got this lens, the Carl Zeiss Jena Flektogon 35mm f2.4. I've owned this lens for many years and I've given it a great deal of use. It's one of my favourites. I absolutely love it. I used it to make many of the early videos for this channel. I've shot a great many images with it. I've used it and used it and used it, and it's really stood up to that test well. Carl Zeiss Jena lenses are sometimes said to be a little bit delicate, but the proof of the pudding's in the eating, and this one has stood up fine. It's quite a weighty lens and it's quite big as well. Let's just have a closer look at it over here. So there is our Carl Zeiss Jena Flektogon with its maximum aperture of f2.4. So this too is a fairly wide 35mm. It's very nicely made. It's all metal. And it has the Zeiss house style, actually. Both the Eastern and the Western lenses produce their lenses in a very similar style, certainly in terms of appearance. It does have a slightly vulnerable front element. There's quite a big front element there. Let's get a bit more light. There's quite a big front element there. I don't know if you can see it. And it's right at the edge of the lens, so when you're using one of these it's best to use a filter because that can easily get damaged. The focus ring is at the front on this lens and it still turns very nicely and cleanly with a lovely fluid motion, and the aperture ring is at the back. There we are. So we've got f22 all the way round to f2.4. Now, with its fairly wide aperture and its close focusing distance of, I'm pretty sure, 20 centimeters. In fact, it even goes a little beyond 20, probably down to 19 or 18 centimeters. So those two factors, its relatively wide aperture and its close distance, mean that you can make a lot of blur with this lens if you want. And if you go right to the minimum focus distance, it's pretty massive actually. It does get close, but it's not a macro lens. It isn't far off a macro lens, and it does take you into the world of the small. You can photograph some very small things with a lot of clarity with this lens. On full frame it focuses down to 20 centimeters, but on crop sensor bodies the effective minimum focus distance, and that's true for all of these lenses, is actually reduced. So effectively it will go closer. So on a micro four thirds body this lens effectively focuses down to about 10 centimeters. On an APS-C body this lens effectively focuses down to about 13 centimeters. The lens doesn't change, but the field of view does change with the smaller sensors, and so the lens's effective performance is changed. So the point of all that is to note that if you're using this lens on a crop sensor body, you're going to get much closer than you can with it on full frame, and then it does begin to become a macro lens. It enters that macro territory. But whichever sensor you're shooting, this is a very versatile lens. The colours it makes are beautiful, absolutely stunning, right in the Carl Zeiss Jena tradition. They're saturated, but they're not excessively saturated, so this lens doesn't reach the saturation levels of the Pancolar, but even so colours are very pleasing from this lens. Carl Zeiss Jena lenses were some of the best of their day, and it shows. In my experience, this lens is equal to or better than the Western Zeiss equivalent of the time. It's very sharp, even wide open, and you can shoot this lens all day long and never see a trace of softness. And in fact, I've mostly shot it wide open as well. Stopping down makes it sharper, and stopping down also might help if you're working at the minimum focus distance and you have almost no depth of field to play with. Stopping down in those conditions means that the small object you're photographing comes more into focus. You're going to be able to see more of it in sharp focus. So I've done that a few times too. Stopping down makes it sharper, but not by a great deal. Detail is there from the widest aperture setting with this lens. I think this is one of the nicest vintage lenses you can buy, and I've used it for all sorts of photography. As I've said, I've made loads of episodes of this for this channel with it. I've shot a lot of stuff that I've sold. I've shot a lot of small stuff with it. I've used it and used it and used it for all sorts of photography. It's not the cheapest vintage lens out there, but it is one of the best, without question. For a good one of these, you will pay between £100 and £150. Sometimes more is asked, but I don't think anyone should pay more. Best thing to do is find a good one of these on auction, or sometimes you find old cameras, particularly old Praktica cameras, actually often have, well, not often, but sometimes have one of these attached. Those are a good source as well, because you can usually get those a little cheaper than a lens on its own, strangely enough. But a beautiful lens, well worth having, and I think probably the single most versatile 35mm lens on the vintage lens market at the moment. So those are my top picks for what I consider to be the nicest 28 and 35mm vintage lenses. However, honourable mentions must go to the following: the Canon FD 28mm f2.8, a beautiful lens, a little larger than some of the others, but a very, very nice lens that makes stunning images. Absolutely beautiful lens. There's the Konica 28mm f2.8, a very cheap lens which you'll probably be able to pick up for £30 to £40 or so, but optically outstanding. Don't look down on Konica made lenses. They made some really nice lenses, and this is one of them. We've got the Olympus 35mm f3.5. I used that lens for a long time. It's a very beautiful lens and it makes stunning images. A little bit slow at f3.5, but when you see the images from it, you won't mind that at all. The Olympus 35mm f2.8 is another lovely little lens with all the Olympus virtues: colour, sharpness and contrast. And the Voigtlander 35mm f2, a stunning wide-angle lens in the higher price bracket. So that's it from me for today. Please don't forget to like, subscribe and ring that bell before you go. And if you like the content on this channel and you'd like to help it to grow and develop, you can do that at patreon.com/Zenography. As ever, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time for some more Zenography.